September 10, 1944. Supreme Headquarters of the Allied Expeditionary Force, Granville, France. General Dwight D. Eisenhower sits at his desk, examining the latest reports from the front lines. The news fills the room with both excitement and concern. The Allied forces have surged out of Normandy, pushing swiftly across France. Paris has been freed from occupation, and German troops are falling back. It feels as though victory is almost within grasp. Yet, a major challenge looms. Supplies are failing to keep pace with the rapid advance. Fuel reserves are dangerously low, and ammunition stocks are shrinking. Every day, American and British units push further, moving away from their supply bases on the Normandy coast. Eisenhower faces a pivotal choice. The Allied armies cannot all be fully supplied simultaneously. He must decide which forces will receive priority. Should he maintain a broad advance and divide resources evenly? Or should he focus his supplies on a single army to deliver a powerful, concentrated push into Germany? The decision he makes now could shape the outcome of the war. British Field Marshal Bernard Law Early, September 10, 1944, Supreme Headquarters, Allied Expeditionary Force, France. General Bernard Montgomery, commander of the 21st Army Group, comprising British and Canadian troops in northern France, has strong convictions about the next move. For weeks, he has pressed Eisenhower to give him top priority for all supplies. Montgomery envisions a powerful, concentrated strike through Belgium and the Netherlands into Germany's industrial heartland. He believes that with enough resources, this bold maneuver could end the war by Christmas 1944. Across the theater, American generals see things differently. General Omar Bradley, in charge of the U.S. 12th Army Group, which includes Patton's 3rd Army and Hodge's 1st Army, is advancing rapidly through central France and resists any slowdown. General George Patton is particularly adamant that his forces can push straight into Germany if fuel and supplies are sufficient. Eisenhower faces an almost impossible challenge: allocating scarce supplies among competing demands while managing Montgomery, whose messages grow increasingly insistent and confrontational. On this particular September day, Montgomery sends yet another urgent appeal, directly challenging Eisenhower's broader strategy. The tension between the two leaders is building toward a showdown that could shape the final months of the European war. To understand the stakes, it helps to recall the recent campaign. The Allied invasion of Normandy began on June 6, 1944, D-Day. After weeks of grueling combat, Allied forces broke out of the hedgerows by early August. Operation Cobra, led by Bradley's forces, shattered German defenses and enabled a rapid advance. Throughout August, Patton's 3rd Army surged eastward, liberating swaths of territory, while British and Canadian units pressed north toward Belgium. Paris fell on August 25, and by early September, some Allied units had already reached Germany's borders. This lightning advance created a major supply crisis. Logistics had been planned for a slower, more methodical pace, with depots concentrated near the Normandy beaches. Captured ports, like Cherbourg, were still partially unusable due to German sabotage. Fuel, ammunition, food, spare parts, and medical supplies all had to be transported hundreds of miles to the front lines. Even the Red Ball Express, a massive truck convoy operation running day and night, couldn't keep up with the demand. Patton's units were approaching the Moselle River and the German frontier, yet fuel shortages forced tanks to halt on the roads. Bradley's 1st Army faced similar constraints, and Montgomery's northern forces were equally dependent on resupply.
Eisenhower's overarching strategy called for a broad front advance, keeping pressure along the entire line to prevent the Germans from concentrating against any single thrust. This approach was cautious, but aimed at minimizing risk. Montgomery fundamentally disagreed. He argued that a focused, high-powered thrust was the only way to deliver a decisive blow. He insisted that if given priority in supplies, his northern forces could drive through Belgium and the Netherlands, cross the Rhine, seize the Ruhr, and possibly reach Berlin before winter. From early August onward, he sent multiple messages urging Eisenhower to divert resources from American units to his own forces. Eisenhower remained skeptical. He recognized that a single thrust carried enormous risk. The Germans, though retreating, could regroup and counterattack, potentially stopping a concentrated advance. He also faced political realities. American troops now outnumbered the British in France, and public opinion would not tolerate U.S. armies idling while British forces seized glory. By September 4, Montgomery's messages were insistent and pointed. He wrote that only a powerful and full-strength thrust toward Berlin could end the war, urging Eisenhower to allocate all maintenance and supplies to that effort, leaving other units to manage with whatever remained. Eisenhower responded on September 5 with a careful but firm reply. While he understood Montgomery's reasoning, he did not believe a single thrust should come at the expense of all other operations. He stressed that although the German army in the West had been largely destroyed, enough enemy forces remained to pose a threat. Maintaining a broad advance would keep the Germans off balance while preparing for eventual operations across the Rhine. The disagreement was stark. Montgomery wanted concentration. Eisenhower insisted on a broad front. Neither was willing to compromise. On September 10, Montgomery requested a personal meeting at Brussels airport. Eisenhower agreed. According to accounts from staff officers and aides, including Eisenhower's naval aide, Captain Harry Butcher, the meeting was tense, confrontational, and destined to become a defining moment in Allied command history. Eisenhower arrived at Brussels airport in his aircraft. Montgomery was already waiting when Eisenhower arrived. Accounts suggest that he immediately began pressing for his plan, a concentrated strike through Belgium and the Netherlands. Maps were laid out on the table, illustrating the bold thrust he envisioned. But before they could discuss strategy in detail, a minor but tense dispute arose. Eisenhower had recently injured his knee and was in significant discomfort, making it difficult to climb out of his aircraft. According to Eisenhower's naval aide, Captain Harry Butcher, the Supreme Commander suggested holding the meeting inside the aircraft so he could keep his leg elevated. Montgomery refused. Instead, Montgomery insisted the discussion take place outside the aircraft or in a headquarters building, a subtle assertion of authority. Eisenhower, frustrated and in pain, eventually agreed to meet at Montgomery's headquarters. Once inside, Montgomery launched into his argument. He spread out maps and described how his forces could drive through Belgium and Holland, cross the Rhine, and reach Germany's industrial heartland before winter if given priority for all supplies. He criticized Eisenhower's broad front strategy as overly cautious, even implying that the Supreme Commander did not fully understand the stakes. Eisenhower listened patiently at first, but as Montgomery pressed his case with increasing insistence, the tension escalated. Accounts vary on the exact words, but the essence is clear. At one point, Eisenhower, asserting his authority, reportedly placed a hand on Montgomery's knee and said firmly, "Steady, Monty. You can't speak to me like that. I'm your superior." Montgomery, taken aback, immediately backed down, later writing in his memoirs, "I said, 'I'm sorry, Ike.'" The confrontation eased, but the strategic disagreement remained. Eisenhower laid out his position clearly. The broad front strategy would continue. All Allied armies would advance together. No single commander would receive all supplies to the exclusion of others. Bradley's American forces would continue pushing toward the Rhine, while Montgomery's units would advance in the north. Yet Eisenhower offered a compromise. Montgomery would receive priority for a specific operation, an airborne assault to capture bridges across the Rhine in Holland. This mission would get full support, but it would not halt the broader Allied advance. Montgomery accepted the compromise, and the operation was planned as Operation Market Garden, set to launch on September 17, 1944. Eisenhower confirmed the decision in a formal message dated September 15, stating that Montgomery would have full logistical support for the operation, but that other operations would continue along the entire front. Montgomery acknowledged the decision, adding that he believed Market Garden could open the way into Germany and potentially shorten the war. Operation Market Garden, the largest airborne assault of its time, began on September 17th. Paratroopers and glider infantry landed across Holland to seize key bridges at Eindhoven, Nijmegen, and Arnhem. The plan aimed to create a corridor for Allied forces to bypass German defenses and cross the Rhine. The operation ultimately failed. British paratroopers at Arnhem were surrounded and overwhelmed. The critical bridge at Arnhem, which would have opened the route into Germany, was never captured. Of the 10,000 troops deployed there, only about 2,000 escaped. The rest were killed or taken prisoner. Montgomery's concentrated thrust had not succeeded. The strategic debate between Eisenhower and Montgomery continued. Montgomery remained convinced the broad front approach was wrong. Eisenhower remained equally firm in his belief that a coordinated advance across all fronts was the only sustainable strategy. In the wake of Market Garden's failure, Montgomery wrote to Eisenhower, lamenting, "I must say that I think we have failed to exploit the great victory in Normandy, and the Germans have been allowed to recover." Eisenhower's response, dated September 22, 1944, was calm but firm. He disagreed that opportunities had been squandered, noting that the Allies had advanced farther and faster than any army in history and had destroyed most German forces in France. He reassured Montgomery that the supply situation was temporary and would improve as additional ports were brought online. The tension between strategy and ambition persisted. Montgomery continued to push for a single concentrated thrust toward Germany, while Eisenhower consistently defended the broad front approach. Throughout October and November 1944, the debate played out in letters and meetings. In a message on October 16th, Montgomery urged, "I recommend that we concentrate all our efforts on one main thrust. All other operations should be subsidiary." Eisenhower replied 2 days later, stating, "I cannot agree. We will continue the broad front strategy. All armies will advance as supplies permit. We will not halt American forces to supply only British units." Eisenhower's position never wavered. He refused to give Montgomery exclusive priority for supplies and insisted that all Allied forces continue advancing simultaneously. The professional relationship between Eisenhower and Montgomery remained strained, with Montgomery repeatedly critiquing strategy and Eisenhower responding with measured firmness. The debate reached a new intensity during the Battle of the Bulge in late December 1944. The German Ardennes offensive initially created a dangerous gap in Allied lines. To stabilize the northern sector, Eisenhower temporarily placed some American forces under Montgomery's command. Montgomery managed these units competently, but following the crisis, he gave a press conference implying that British forces had saved the Americans. Contemporary reports from January 7, 1945, showed that his comments caused a political firestorm. American commanders were outraged. Bradley threatened to resign, and Patton demanded Montgomery's dismissal. Eisenhower intervened directly, insisting Montgomery retract his statements. Recognizing his error, Montgomery sent a formal apology on January 10, 1945. "I am very distressed that my remarks at the press conference have been so misinterpreted. I had no intention of belittling the American effort. Please accept my apologies."
Eisenhower accepted the apology, but emphasized that mutual respect and cooperation were essential to the Allied cause. Throughout these confrontations, the September 10 meeting, the failure of Market Garden, and the post-Bulge controversy, Eisenhower maintained his commitment to the broad front strategy. He never granted Montgomery the concentrated thrust he desired. Military historians continue to debate whether a single powerful drive could have ended the war sooner. Some argue Montgomery's plan might have worked with full support. Others insist Eisenhower's broad front approach was strategically sound. Eisenhower's reasoning was multifaceted. Militarily, it applied pressure across the entire German front, preventing the enemy from massing forces against a single target. Politically, halting American armies to prioritize British forces was unacceptable. Practically, a concentrated thrust lacked the logistical strength to reach Berlin against a still capable German defense. Montgomery remained convinced his approach was superior, but Market Garden's failure demonstrated the risks inherent in such a strategy. The war continued through the winter and spring of 1945 along the broad front Eisenhower had insisted upon. American armies crossed the Rhine in March, with British forces advancing in the north. By April, Allied units were deep in Germany, culminating in Germany's unconditional surrender on May 8, 1945. After the war, Montgomery continued to claim in memoirs and interviews that Eisenhower had been wrong. Eisenhower, in his own memoir, Crusade in Europe, 1948, defended the broad front strategy. The German is never so dangerous as when he has been able to concentrate a strong reserve. Because of general Allied pressure at all points, the German High Command could not withdraw troops from quiet sectors to strengthen a threatened area. Regarding Montgomery's repeated demands for a single thrust, Eisenhower wrote clearly, "Concentrating all resources in a single drive from Belgium to Berlin was not feasible given the supply situation." The historical record from September 10, 1944 shows the essence of their confrontation. When Montgomery pressed too hard, Eisenhower's words were firm and decisive. "Steady, Monty. You can't speak to me like that. I'm your boss." Throughout the fall, Eisenhower consistently refused to halt all other operations in order to support a single thrust, remaining steadfast in the broad front strategy that ultimately carried the Allies to victory. The Allied advance would continue along the entire front. Even after the failure of Market Garden, Eisenhower's forces had moved farther and faster than any army in history. The supply difficulties of the time were temporary, expected to improve as new ports and logistics came online. The alliance between Britain and the United States relied on mutual respect and cooperation. Public statements that undermined that partnership, such as Montgomery's controversial press conference after the Battle of the Bulge, threatened the unity of the effort. These documented exchanges reveal Eisenhower's consistent leadership style, patient but resolute, open to discussion but unwavering in strategic judgment, committed to cooperation yet clear about his authority as supreme commander. The confrontation over supplies and strategy between Eisenhower and Montgomery became one of the most significant command disputes of World War II. It tested Eisenhower's leadership, strained the Anglo-American alliance, and influenced the course of the war. Eisenhower managed the conflict by balancing strategic vision with tactical accommodation. He granted Montgomery priority for Market Garden, placed American forces temporarily under Montgomery's command during the Bulge crisis, but never abandoned the broad front strategy that he believed was essential. His famous remark to Montgomery, "You can't speak to me like that, I'm your boss," captures the essence of their relationship. Montgomery was brilliant, experienced, and confident, yet Eisenhower remained firmly in command. History shows that Eisenhower's measured and determined leadership preserved the alliance, maintained strategic coherence, and ultimately led Allied forces to victory. Montgomery's single thrust plan may have succeeded, or it might have failed disastrously. What is certain is that Eisenhower's broad front approach worked. Germany was defeated, and the war was won. This narrative is based on historical records, including official Supreme Headquarters Allied Expeditionary Force documents, preserved military correspondence in the National Archives and Eisenhower Presidential Library, first-hand accounts from participants, and published memoirs. All quotations are drawn from these sources. Viewers are encouraged to consult multiple references when studying this critical period of military history. This content is provided for educational purposes.